2, 1. All right, everybody. So I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to quasi order. In terms of, I just want to remind everybody we sit on a lonely land. And our quote for today is, you can't build a great building on a weak foundation. A roll call. I'm going to go through and ensure that everybody can fully participate in this meeting. All right, so I'm going to call people's names as I see them. Cecily?
Here.
Thank you. Liz?
Here.
Thank you. Kelly?
Here.
Thank you. Trustee Jones?
Here.
Thank you. Judy?
Here.
Thank you. William?
Here.
Thank you. Brian?
Here.
Thank you. Eric?
Here.
Thank you. And Robert?
Here.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We will be loosely guided by the agenda. We can't quite adopt it, but that'll guide our discussion until we reach quorum. We have also No, wait, I think the approach that we'll take is we will have the next time we meet ratify our actions. So as of right now, we can't take binding actions because we haven't met quorum. But the next time we do meet quorum, whatever decisions we make would be recommendations to that body, and they can choose to then ratify these decisions. So let's go back to agenda. Do I have any objections to adopting the agenda as drafted? Let's actually use this as an opportunity to make sure that we all remember how to vote. It's been a month. Could I have people raise their virtual hand? Everybody who's a voting member, if you could please raise your virtual hand. Great, please lower your hands. And we have quorum. All right, so do we have any, let me just repeat that. Do we have any objections to adopting the agenda as proposed? Seeing none, we'll move forward. Do I hear any objections to approving the minutes as provided to you in Exhibit A? This would be the place where if you have a comment, want to amend or modify, you would raise an objection, make that comment, and we'll process it accordingly. Seeing none, we'll then adopt the minutes as proposed in Exhibit A. I checked the oral and written communications before starting the meeting. We had one request, not tied to this meeting in particular, but to put the links to the videos of the meetings on the website. And I did so in conjunction with, well, Bart did so given that recommendation. And then we received a question as to whether or not we would have a meeting this Wednesday. And I alerted Lisa that we were going to have the meeting on Thursday per the agreement we made on May 12th. So that sums up all the emails that we've gotten, no public comments. And now I'll hand it over to Kelly for the staff update.
Okay. And Antonio, I didn't hear the last part of what you just said. Did you say the links were posted to the website? Because I know that we did request Bart to do that.
Yeah, that's correct. He did so.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I heard that correctly. Okay. As far as the staff update goes, there's always too much for me to talk about, but I'll try and condense it. We are preparing for our summer projects. So maintenance and operation has just been working with various contractors to go ahead and execute their agreements to get work started on all of the pavement and asphalt and playground asphalt work that will be done this summer. We are also working on our ADA path of travel requirements that we have to do for areas that were identified to be in need of modification or out of compliance. Rick Skalankler Early Learning Center was bid and a contract was awarded to Cal Pacific. We had our pre-job meeting today and we're expecting actual shovel to ground to start with demolition and asbestos abatement beginning, I believe, as early as mid next week. So we're excited about that. And so you guys will see lots of activity at that job site over the next 7 weeks. Really very, aggressive trying to get everything done. We had also, actually, I'll let Eric report out on the T-Mobile, RICS, and also the modular projects that we have going on. Eric, did you want to share with them?
Yes,
briefly?
thank you, Kelly. Basically, like Kelly talked about that, we had the pre-construction meeting with the contractor today. The good thing is we also have our, because we separate this project into multiple contracts with the casework contractors and the abatement contractors. They were all in the pre-construction meeting today so that we can, they can coordinate their work with the general contractor. So we, like what Kelly mentioned it, we trust that the demolitions, basically the soft demolition will be start like next week, and all the submittals and all the other works it will going, will start already. So that's Rick's, and we have very tight schedule, but we start that already. Another thing is the T-Mobile project is basically it's a very small project at Washington High School. It's by T-Mobile. They're basically changing their antenna into newer equipments. That will start like beginning of next month, which is June, the first week of next month. It only take about 2 weeks for them to update their equipments right there. So that's already existing equipments at, basically they are at the, if you know, they're the equipments at the football field, one of the light posts. They're going to replace the equipment right there. Last but not least is the portable buildings relocation. We have a project to relocate 6 portable buildings from Leach Elementary School to Graymore, let me think, Kennedy High School and Maloney Elementary. Yeah. So we have already have the architects on board, and I just received some layout today, in fact. And the project is a summer project also. So 3 buildings in Kennedy High School, 2 buildings at Graymore, and 1 buildings at Maloney.
Thank you, Eric. The other things that we have going on, of course, are Measure E projects, and we have Thornton that's moving along very nicely, and is, of course, can drive by and see the progress.
Kelly, can you try? Kelly,
skeletal structures of the buildings going in.
Kelly?
Am I frozen?
Not quite, but your voice is distorted. Can you try turning off your video?
Oh, how's it now? Is that much better?
So far, so good. Yep.
Okay.
Well, now we can't tell if you're taking very long pauses or you're. Yeah.
What part did I leave off?
No, you're coming in distorted still.
And then.
Do you want to try calling in from your cell phone and using Kelly?
Let me see. Yeah, let me go ahead and get my phone, and I'll do that and see if that works better.
Okay.
I apologize for that.
No worries. Awesome. Thank you. We'll wait. now's a good time for everybody to explore the video filters option. Apparently you can give yourself a hat. Looks great, huh? So it's part of the staff update, but I just wanted to remind everybody that we, I believe 5 or so members are terming out in September. So at the end of September, now granted it is May, we should have a meeting, I believe in August, and then the September one, I might be adding a meeting that doesn't quite exist. I'd have to check back. But you should think about preparing your applications, not necessarily now, but after the summer. But we just wanted to give people a heads up. I know that Brian, Liz, myself are part of those individuals, and there's, I believe, 2 others. While we're waiting, why don't I just pull that up? So we just wanted to make sure this is on your radar. We have had people reapply to the committee and be appointed. So to the extent you want to continue serving, we would encourage you to reapply. And let me see if I can identify the other 2 individuals. There it is. Okay. So Malia terms out, but she's a student rep. And who else? Sharon Coco. Although I think she might not choose to renew. So just so it would just mostly be Brian, myself, and Liz. Can you unmute, Kelly, your phone? I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
All right, how's that?
Better. I did go over the renewal, the reminder to have people renew their applications in September. So you can skip over that part, but please continue with your update.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
I was talking about the middle school.
Sorry, one last thing.
Yeah.
Could I ask you to turn the volume down completely on your computer?
Oh, on the, yes. That's what I was trying to figure out. How's that? Is the echo gone now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. I'll figure it out one day. The other item that I was going to share with you all is that Hopkins and Centerville had general contractor contracts awarded last month. So all of those current construction contracts are already awarded, and we have started what we call bidding out the sub packages. So that those packages will be bid out and awarded over the summer, and we'll come back to the board in September for approval of those. And all of the site utility work and clearing and grubbing work has begun on those 2 sites. So you'll begin to see a lot more activity over the next few weeks at those 2 sites than what you currently see right now. I know Centerville is just one big pile of dirt, but we're going to start moving and doing underground activities, and you'll begin to see the formation of the footprint of some of the new structures and a lot of the utility tie-ins occurring. The other thing that's happening, the Washington Theater, we're at about, I believe it's about 64% complete. So we're excited about that, and we're going to be pushing very hard over the next month of June and July to finish that particular project on time for the fall. That also is coming together in terms of visually being able to see the end product of what's going on at the job site. We also have some really good news with the principal. We spoke with him, I believe it was last month, and they were awarded a grant for the makerspace at that site. And so some of the modifications and requests for increase of funding are related to some of the activities that he's going to need to be able to realize the use of some of the equipment that he's getting from this grant that they were awarded. That's a very, I guess, prestigious award within the makerspace community. So that's going to be happening over the summer. And just the usual, facility stuff. We're preparing for all of our summer usual maintenance and operations activities. And so we have HVA assessment services that will be starting next month, which will include looking at all of our school sites and evaluating all of the building systems to make sure that, one, they are functioning correctly according to what they're supposed to do, but also measuring airflow and their ability to perform to the standards to meet our COVID-19 compliance. And so once we have that data collected, we'll be able to then, of course, do an assessment to say, however many school sites need additional work, or all school sites are in compliance, or those that we had already identified as being, I call them problem children, will then have the ability to be addressed pretty quickly and have data to back up our position of why we need to either replace the units or modify them significantly to meet whatever requirements we're required to adhere to. So that work will be starting, I believe, on Thursday next week. So, and that will run all the way through August because it's kind of timely, but they are going to go to all 43 sites plus the district office and the district corporation yard. And they are looking at COIL as well as RICS. We don't count because they're getting new systems anyway with the modernization, but they are going to measure post-construction to ensure that, of course, airflow and all of our systems are working correctly. So that's it for me in terms of report out. Are there any questions that you all have on anything that I've mentioned? I take that as a no. So
Actually,
Antonio, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Go ahead, Liz.
sorry, I'm wondering when it comes to replacing units, particularly units that are on the roof, which I'm gonna assume only because circumstantially that seems to be where I recognize those units being most of the time. When they get changed out, do you have to kind of keep to the same weight of a unit for the structural integrity of the classrooms? Can you go heavier? How do you know?
Well, when we actually, so when we do the analysis, one, the unit is then sized to determine, hey, is this the appropriate size for the space that it's going to be servicing? Secondly, yes, we do structural integrity testing to say, hey, if the old unit weighs X amount of pounds, the new unit is going to be X amount. And if there's a delta, then we have to design what we call, shoring points or support points in those areas where that unit is going to be supported. And so all of those modifications will occur at the same time that the unit then is replaced. So it's kind of an overall holistic improvement versus just kind of the horse before the cart. We kind of do it all at the same time. So you'll never be in a situation where you have a unit that's going to be, putting stresses on a facility and not be able to, hold the weight. So we definitely will be doing those kinds of investigations as well. And then two, if we're in a situation where a lot of our roofs right now are coming up on their 30-year, warranty, we're also going to be doing, testing and roof analysis for areas that may be impacted because of the change, because we don't want to put a new system on an old roof and have to come back and move it, 2 or 3 years later. If we can, kind of holistically improve and make it work, we'll make that determination as well. But in the end, of course, it's always about what our budget will bear. But You know, we're good at making water out of rock, pulling water out of rocks, right? So we'll figure out how to make that happen as we come across that challenge.
Great. Thanks, Kelly.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So now, where did the agenda go? There it is. So now we can go ahead and move towards the subcommittee report. Do we have a report from demographics? I don't imagine so, but I wanted to schedule it just in case. Okay, great.
I did reach out to Davis Demographics, and he is going to respond to my question. I sent that out, I think, on today is Thursday, so I sent that on Monday. So and I gave him till Friday, but he will respond to us.
Okay, thank you. And so we can proceed forward to the ventilation subcommittee report. At the prior meeting, we had extensive discussion as to the report as it was presented to you. I logged various of the concerns, and I believe we've addressed them. So we met at the subcommittee level and worked to address the concerns that were raised at the prior meeting. I did realize, however, that it might be beneficial to have to refer people to the ventilation FAQ, which I linked in the agenda, as well as the FAQ that the subcommittee and district collaborated on. We provided the questions and the district provided responses. There was one in particular that kind of goes to the complexity of this whole issue. So if I could refer people to the subcommittee Q&A. And let me find it again. It's actually question 4. So we asked whether the district had data on what percentage of classrooms don't have windows that can be opened. And this was, by the way, March 26th, right? So some of this information may not be up to date, but again, it just adds to the complexity of the issue. And there was an estimation of around 53%, but we wanted to know if the district had a more accurate count. And what are we going to do with classrooms that don't have windows that can be opened? Is there a way to bring more fresh air into the classrooms? What we realized, and Kelly can add further context, is that opening doors is not always an option. Again, you have this in front of you, but to the extent that people are watching, opening doors isn't always an option, especially in newer buildings. So for example, Horner and the high schools. The HVAC would automatically shut down when doors are left open. So the new facilities are designed to work with doors and windows closed. The airflow is based on the size of the room and adjusts according to the volume of air that's being moved. And so we quickly came to realize that, we would have thought, we can use HVAC, doors, windows, all to maximize outside air that's being circulated in a building. But if by opening a door, which by itself is not going to bring outside air in, if that's going to shut off the HVAC, which circulates in some outside air, we would be not necessarily meeting the top risk mitigation strategy that we discussed at the prior meeting, right? So we realized then that it was going to depend based on the facility. So does that make sense, or should we go back to why don't we go back to the report? And let's just remind it's been 2 weeks, but it may still help. Let me go ahead and also, we could go through the report quickly and address the changes that we've made. So just 1 second. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is the late May revision of the subcommittee report. So we wanted to start off by including goals. So the main goal of this report is to develop a common understanding related to ventilation. We wanted to highlight all the work that the district had done on ventilation and adopt mitigation strategies to address risks of COVID-19 transmission. we also went slightly further and we added considerations to keep in mind when it comes to smoke. And you'll see that in the report. So we've reviewed this, these are the common definitions, so no changes there. Going back to that point that I drew up on the FAQ, the primary mitigation strategy that we have, and this one should govern most, is increasing the ventilation rate, or in otherwise maximizing the outdoor air ventilation. Then increasing filter efficiency. As we've discussed, outside of 5 sites, we can't really upgrade system filters above MERV 13. And then we can supplement with portable air cleaners. So in the district, in order to mitigate risk, what we're really relying on is we want to increase the amount of outside air, and we're supplementing with portable air cleaners. So going back to that point, right? So at Horner, you would think, common sense, that if you opened a door and opened windows and ran HVAC, that would help you bring in the most outside air. What we learned in discussions with the district is that no, actually that would shut down the amount of outside air, since a door itself won't necessarily bring in outside air unless there's a current, and the HVAC would shut down. So again, we want to make sure that whatever we're doing, we are treating these mitigation strategies in order of most effective. We've discussed this. The only addition here is that in the case of smoky air conditions, as one would think, I'll call right now on questions. In the case of smoky air conditions, in contrast to mitigating risk for COVID, where we want to keep dampers or essentially, what's the other term, Kelly, that's being used for HVAC? Whatever that intake is to bring in outside air.
Oh, it's just dampers and your air exchange. You have your registers and your air intake exchange returns. So.
Okay, right. So for COVID, you want to keep those air intakes open. In the case of smoke, we close them down and we try to recirculate air. Liz, you had a question?
Yes, this having to do with demand control ventilation. Is that the DCV what shuts off the HVAC when you have a door open? I'm kind of wondering, when does that demand control ventilation come into play?
So your demand control ventilation is, in layman's terms, it's your automated control system. So, and that's the sort of the computer brain of the HVAC system, to know that there's a series of sensors along the various points of the ductwork and in the classroom to show that, hey, these temperatures have fluctuated over, 5 degrees. We're going to turn our system on. So that control system, we usually have, when they're installed, the manufacturer has recommended set points. And so they're programmed according to those recommended set points, which are based on the standards that SRA has established for the room of that particular size and use and overall intended occupancy for that space. And so if there's a need for it to be overridden because of exterior conditions, i.e. smoke, fire, chemical, or, just irritants in the air, we then have the ability to manually override at the district office, which is where we call the motherboard, where that will then be reprogrammed to then say, okay, instead of only opening, once per hour, maybe we want you to be closed for a certain period of time and be put in recirculation mode if you have contaminants that you're trying to keep out. In the instance where we want fresh air, we can actually program it so that the dampers are open to the most optimum, width or distance up to 100%, to say, hey, we want 100% fresh air in, 3 cycles per hour, or however many we program it for. So that's how that would work.
And may I have a
follow-up? I
follow-up?
hope that answered the question.
No, it goes with what Antonio has been telling us in terms of the ventilation rate. And I guess my follow-up question would be, do all of our systems have a demand control?
All of our systems have a demand control, and what we are doing right now is establishing a standard, and we're going to be updating all of our control systems so that they all can talk to one another. Because right now we have about 5 different systems that we're operating with, various ages, ranges, sizes, capacities. And so as part of that assessment that we're doing beginning next week is looking at how those control systems are used, where they're located, and if there's a modification that's needed, figure out what that needs to be so that they're all talking the same language at the same time, going back to the maintenance office on Grimmer. So there is no system that does not have a control system. It's just that we have 5 different ones that we now have to, modernize, standardize, and make them all talk together.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
And Kelly, as a follow-up to that, putting aside that there are 5 systems, my understanding was that the portables are not tied to that district office. Is that a misunderstanding on my part?
No, you're absolutely right. And that's part of what we're doing is we're actually tying the temporary classrooms back into the main system so that everything on all campuses are connected and talking together. For the fire alarm system, they do communicate, but for the control system, they don't always communicate. And that's where we're minimizing our scope gaps and putting everything together so that, I use Kennedy as a good example because they have so many temporary classrooms. And it's almost, if you can visualize, daisy chaining everything together and sending everything back to a central panel, which then would go back to the district office. So that's part of the scope of work that's going to happen on that campus as well.
Do we expect that communication to be completed by the beginning of the school year? The reason I ask this is because, okay, great. Because to the extent, otherwise Kennedy has to know this is how we have to program it for smoke. This is how okay, great.
Right.
All right. Going forward, so yeah, as we mentioned, for smoke, you want to close those dampers and that intake, right? And
correct.
For filtering indoor air, as we've talked about, we don't quite, there are 5 sites that have MERV 13. Otherwise, we have MERV 11. What we did discuss at the subcommittee level is that the EPA recommends MERV 13 for smoke. In the case of like tobacco lounges, use like MERV 14. But again, I think, based on environmental regulators' guidance, MERV 13 would make sense. In the case of wildfires, right? So when we've talked about potential future proofing, while we expect the pandemic to, hopefully not be with us for too long, as of right now, we don't necessarily see an end to the wildfire seasons that are recurring, and so that may be an instance of future proofing. Moving forward. On the air purification, this is the portable air purifiers. Similarly, we added this consideration about wildfire, and you would want to use a portable air. And I think that was discussed when we made the decision to purchase portable air cleaners. We could end up using them in the case of smoky days. So again, it's not just for the pandemic. There was a discussion that I had with Kelly briefly about the air changes per hour. I would definitely invite any committee member to, double check this. But upon my check, the larger filter delivers 500 cubic feet per minute. Once you run that through the calculations, these measurements are incorrect. What was it that we talked about, Kelly? 40 by 24, is that right?
Yeah, but that's the outside to outside, but you're probably closer to correct because you have to count the dimensions of the walls and then the finishes on the inside, and so the actual interior space is what you'd be calculating, whereas the dimension I gave you is the actual outside to outside dimension. So you're probably closer to being correct on this.
Okay, and so then it would be imperative to find out what the height would be, right? So if it's 8 feet, it brings the air changes per hour up. we want to target an air change per hour of 5. We get to an ideal of 6, but depending on what the height of the classrooms are, of a typical classrooms are, we would fall under if it was a 9-foot ceiling, right? So that's the calculation for air changes per hour. Moving forward, we've talked about this. There were no changes, just that CO2 is a good measurement of air circulation, bringing in outside air. Material concerns. This one is the one that I would like us to discuss a bit further. I mentioned, for example, that currently indoor sports or indoor practices, for example, are being done. So we are using gyms and those larger spaces. I don't believe we have air purification set up. And furthermore, I don't think we have direction on, opening doors, keeping doors open. How is HVAC running in these larger rooms, and what advances have we made on air purification for these much larger spaces?
Well, it's my understanding in speaking with our director of M&O that the larger spaces, we are looking at larger units. But right now we have our HVAC consultant looking at the, how can I say this, the air exchange currently with the systems that we have in place and what it would be with our doors open, because the high occupancy spaces are calculated differently than we would calculate an office or a classroom. And so in working with our design team, I've asked them to kind of do a comparison analysis for us to show, hey, this is where we are right now as it's designed. And based on new standard requirements, these are the mitigation measures that we can put in place. And in speaking with the superintendent and Kevin earlier this week, we have the ability and are looking at larger, purchasing larger units or putting multiple units in those spaces until we come up with whatever our defined solution will be. And in many instances, in older buildings, it may be actually upsizing those units to handle the airflow and recirculation that's required if the doors have to be closed. Because that's one of the challenges when we're looking at this is that, yes, we want to design it so that we get maximum airflow, but we have to design it as if the doors are closed more often than not. And so that way the system, if we have to close the doors due to fire or, chemicals or something in the air, that system, if it's constantly running, has the ability to recycle the air as if it was pulling fresh air in. So those are some of the challenges that we're working through and figuring out to come up with solutions for those large spaces.
And I would certainly open this up to the wider committee because those spaces are being used now. Because so I understand you're sorting out like how the HVAC is being run. We don't have portable air cleaners. In that case, we have only the one mitigation strategy, and we're still sorting out the details. But those rooms and facilities are being used. Earlier in March, when we talked about when we were starting to touch on this topic, that we were pushing back any considerations of how to use these spaces because they wouldn't be used as instructional spaces. But given that they're used as recreational spaces, what would the timeline be providing guidance to any staff members who are using those spaces in order to mitigate risk best?
It's my understanding that maintenance and operation has placed orders for larger units, but I don't have an ETA as to when those units will be available. And I know that we did purchase quite a few, and I know that several of them are in back order because everybody's buying them. But the intention is for us to have those spaces ready, one for those places that are going to have summer school and summer school activities, but of course focusing on fall instruction and having all spaces having the capability to be used 100% of the time with the air filters and the layered mitigation that you've outlined in this report.
Henry.
Yeah, yeah. To go along with that, I mean, last time this issue came up, yeah, like Kelly said, I mean, the district department wants to focus on either reopening schools in the fall, I mean, the spring when volunteers are coming back, and then now it'll be summer school. But to get to get the instruction ready in the fall, now we're gonna be talking about, like, for example, like PE classes, the changing room where there's no HVACs in there at all, no circulations, barely any doors. So like spaces like that, and also like band rooms and libraries. Will those rooms be taken care of? But I mean, what is the next step for those rooms to get the air purifiers that they need before the fall semester starts? Because right now, last time we checked, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Henry. Finish. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, just last time we checked, like, we stopped by the library and changed the locker rooms this week. We didn't see any air purifiers in there yet, so we'll see when those rooms would when we can expect those.
So as I stated, we're starting our summer work, and that's part of what is going to happen over the summer. Is those secondary, and they're not secondary spaces; they actually are instructional spaces. The non-classroom spaces will be addressed, and so. The M&O team is in the process of, putting that schedule together so that all schools, all spaces will be addressed by our August 18th open day. And then, of course, those spaces where you have summer school and you are going to have staff and students present, those, of course, are being addressed immediately so that those will be available when summer school does actually begin. And I don't believe that all schools are having summer school. I believe there's only certain sites that have been identified in certain spaces that will be used. So, but we are fully planning to have everything available and ready for full use when it's needed, whether it's summer school or fall.
Okay, thank you. So at the last meeting, you mentioned that the teachers should request through our administrators for the bigger units. Do we still need to do that?
Yes.
Because measuring the classroom size, that's been really a big challenge. Like, I was able to go around and measure my classroom, my science lab, that's about twice the size the air purifier can handle, but not everyone's able to come back in person. And then we just got a message saying that
my
teachers.
Suggestion, Henry.
Yes.
So my suggestion is that when you put your request in your description of your space, let them know, and the M&O staff will actually come and measure and make the determination of what the correct size should be, and then bring that unit in and install it based on, their calculations and estimations. But definitely still use the standard work order system. And when you guys are making your request, say, hey, I have a extra large, or I'm in a band room, or I'm a PE teacher in my gym, my classroom is the gymnasium. I need additional units, and they'll come and actually, do their own assessment and then come back with whatever's required to meet your needs.
Okay, thank you. If you could send a message to all the administrators. I know that my principal's working duty on this already, but I think not all administrators know the procedures. They know that they're supposed to put a request for the classroom, the regular classroom, but many of them did not know about what they're supposed to do with the larger spaces yet. I wonder if you and the district can send a message out to all the administrators so that they could let the teachers know to put in the request before they leave for the summer.
I will definitely request that with the Superintendent Selena.
Okay, I just wanted to say I agree with Henry on that. We've gotten no direction at all.
Okay.
And
I'll be more than happy to put something together.
Following up on that point, and maybe if I could reframe Henry's concern, classroom sizes come in a standard size for the most part, right? It's the irregular classroom that might be larger in volume and could warrant additional specifications. I don't remember off the top of my head how many classrooms we have at the district level, but then requesting that be done instead of centrally, even site-based centrally, but be done by each end user, it might be a less efficient, approach to mitigating risks than if done either at the site principal level or at the district level, again, just because classrooms tend to be standard sized, except for the exceptions. So what could you explain a bit more as to the reasoning why that would be put on the end users, like the teachers, as opposed to being handled in a more central manner?
To be honest with you, Antonio, we are very short staffed in the engineering department. So to have, I think there's 75 total engineers, and there's I believe 6 assigned per attendance area, and then there are, you know, different trades and things. And so for them to dedicate 1 or 2 people to go to each site is not as efficient as if a teacher would say, hey, I need, because it's faster for them to address the work order than to actually go out and, I know I'm not saying this correctly, but we just don't have the capacity to be able to do that in-house. And that's part of why we're getting consultants to, one, do the analysis for us, because we don't have a lot of HVAC technicians, and our supervisor for HVAC, Brad, is super busy already. And then we don't have enough engineers with the expertise to actually do that assessment efficiently. So that's why it falls upon the end user and the site to kind of be an extension of us to gather that data, however rudimentary it is, to say, hey, I need another unit, or, you know, and that way they can respond, versus going to a school and then making an assessment, not knowing what that space is used for, and making the wrong assessment. So that's why we've done it that way.
Got it. And then maybe I could pose this question to Judy as principal/FSMA rep. What guidance would you need, or do you think that principals would benefit from, in order to identify, you know, irregular spaces? Do you think that that might be a good way to, you know, ensure that irregular spaces are taken care of?
Yes, I'm working with Robin and Zach and Letty to get the information to the principals. I would like to show them this presentation so that they have some background around it, and because literally we've heard nothing. And then they would be able to understand why it's important for them to collect the information and get it on to M&O. So that's what I'm working on. Amanda and I have talked a couple of times.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And as we've discussed, you know, it could also be part of this committee or the subcommittee to provide principals in advance of either return to school or return to summer school information that they could easily digest, either beyond this presentation or this presentation with further context. So I would highly encourage the committee to provide direction in that vein. So moving forward, steps taken by FUSD, we added a few more steps that were, so we updated it based on the last slide. The district has made an assessment of all school. Actually, Kelly, do you want to speak to this? Any new changes?
Sure.
I think it's just the last 3 or 4 bullets. Oh, that's fine. I'll speak for now. So we've M&O has completed the checks and filters, cleaned those out.
Oh, no
worries. It's mostly
so
this one, the assessment. If you could speak on that and give context.
So if we look at, I think it's the 3rd bullet point down, that has actually been completed. So all systems have received MERV 11 filters where they can be applied. We've also completed the ductwork checks and filters, and then additional portables that are being added this summer will also have the same, you know, check and verification prior to them being brought online. We are in the process of, you know, doing our regular scheduled maintenance of all of our units during the summer. And then the assessment that is identified here is that assessment that will begin next week. And that's where they're going to be looking at all of our HVAC systems and looking at their actual, you know, performance and airflow and, you know, all that very technical related stuff that our staff don't have the capacity to actually do. And then also we are applying for the AB 841 funds, which is a state legislative grant that has the ability for us to pay for some of our HVAC modifications and retrofits that we identify in the completion of our assessment. So one of the things that is actually on the board agenda, we have the contract for the assessment services, and then also the permission to go ahead and actually apply for, the grant and the grant funds. So it's these two things you guys will see next week that we're asking permission to do to move this particular initiative forward.
Thank you, Kelly. And so now we made adjustments to the recommendations based off of the feedback that was provided. We removed an immediate recommendation because it's already being performed, having to do with AB 841 that Kelly just went over. And so we recommend identifying those irregular classrooms. It looks like that work is in progress, and the process by which it's going to be conducted is in play. Liz, go ahead.
Just want to say it before I forget. I believe the correction here would be the 2021 IBC code requirements, because that is the latest version.
Thank you. And if we could, I could defer to Kelly, and she could provide us context for these code requirements and what our current status is. I'd appreciate it.
I will get back to you guys on that. That was on my list, and I do have the 2021 IBC code requirements. I just unfortunately did not have time to prepare to share them with you guys this week, but I'll shoot you that information as without, we can put as a hyperlink to this so people can refer back to it.
Oh, Kelly, just to be clear, I think Liz is recommending we change the recommendation to be 2021, which should be uncontroversial.
Oh, okay.
But if you could give context as to what that is, what it, just anyone reading those words without knowledge or background doesn't know. So you could, yeah.
Sorry. Oh, IBC is the International Building Code, which is the standard in which we build to on a national and international basis for HVAC, and IBC actually uses the ASHRAE standards of performance as their sort of their baseline or their level of required performance for equipment and products that are specified for different spaces and types of activities and requirements for HVAC units.
And we had extensive discussion at the prior meeting about meeting the minimum building code. What, and again, just speaking generally, what is the building code like for schools? What are we governed by? What regulatory agencies provide guidance? Is it similar to residential? Just any kind of general conversation about that would be appreciated.
Okay. So in terms of the standards that we adhere to, so our governing agency for school districts in the state of California is the Division of the State Architect. And they're kind of like our resident building inspector or code compliance officer that you similarly have when you're building a residential structure in, say, your local community. They actually dictate to us what level our buildings need to perform to. So they dictate for us the safety standards, our structural standards, our HVAC, I call it fire, life, and safety, FLS standards, as well as architectural products and space requirements for our educational institutions within the state. And so those standards usually fall in line with the IBC standards for all of those activities. And in some instances, the Division of State Architects actually exceeds the minimum standards that are actually called out in IBC, because they have all these various different scenarios that they say, hey, if and but, you know, you do this, 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 and this. DSA takes the perspective that if any facility is occupied more than 60% of the time by students or staff on a regular basis, they actually require a 20% increase in the level of performance of all of the things that I mentioned before. So many instances for us as school districts, we kind of over design and over specify in terms of performance, because one, we have to have products that perform long term. Usually they're in you know, kind of like a one-time install where they'll be in place for 20 or 30 years, because, you know, we don't always have money to replace things on a regular basis. And then two, because it's a public use facility, we're held to a higher standard of performance than our residential counterparts, because we are responsible for fire, life, and safety of occupants when they're in a public space. So we can have comfort in knowing that the DSA standards meet or exceed the IBC code requirements in most instances when we are specifying or installing products that go into the schools. And so I can, you know, put together a couple more links or frequently asked questions kind of things that people can refer to. But in a nutshell, that's what that's how we design and who we're governed by in terms of our requirements for our performance of our materials and structures for our schools.
Thank you. And if we could pivot to this item, so because I know that there's been back and forth and a response from the district on this. So the recommendation would be developing a ticket system for staff to address ventilation concerns. I know the district has a current position on that. If you could speak as to that, this would be a central ticketing system similar to what is done for technology. For example, if you have a broken laptop, my understanding is you submit a ticket using some kind of outside party or software, and then that reaches our tech team. So could the district speak on this item, please?
So one of the things that we've been talking to M&O about, as well as the software provider that supports our ticket system now, is the current work order system that we have has the capability, if we can actually create special codes for the, you know, the HVAC units and prioritize, like if it's a, you know, critical or immediate or, oh my gosh, you know, my house is on fire kind of thing. We can actually program into the work order system specific, you know, items that would be only for the HVAC systems and air filters and things like that. And so we're kind of figuring out how to do that, because that way we don't have to recreate the wheel, and we can use the current system that we already have and just have it be identified by a special code that can be put on that work order, that when we see it, we know, oh, this is immediately, we have to address this, and this is what it means.
And for the benefit of the committee, the current system is that any work order requests have to essentially be funneled through the site principal. Lacking guidance Correct. On the importance of ventilation, that may fall lower in the priorities of, you know, there's a lot of needs at a public school. And so a central ticketing system that could reach M&O directly through the software may prevent any bottlenecking, inadvertent, not by any means on purpose, but address some very, you know, serious concerns given the nature of this pandemic. And lastly, in long term, I know that this got quite a bit of discussion. We changed the wording on these recommendations to begin by determining the cost of installing HVACs that are able to utilize MERV 13. So going no further than that at this point. Kelly, if you could provide us kind of some of the ballpark figures that you spoke to the subcommittee about, at any one site and how those numbers increase once you start talking about high schools. I believe there's quite a big difference when we're talking about elementary schools as opposed to high schools. Just so that
Sure.
we start thinking in the
So-
ballpark. Thanks.
Sure. So, and this is of course very high level, and please don't, hold my feet to the fire to say that this is a definitive number. But just in a ballpark, if you look at a typical elementary school that has, 5 to 6 buildings and has maybe 600 to 750 students, on average, minimum, it's about $250,000 to change out systems that serve, multiple buildings. And so, of course, if you look at that compared to a high school, we did an analysis when we were looking at, I always use Kennedy because Kennedy is just our big, I call it our big monster because it's just constantly eating all of our funds and, it needs so much. But, to fully retrofit and change out all of the units, all the ductwork, and do a central tie-in at Kennedy, it's well over like $2 to $3 million. So, it's like economy of scale. You have an elementary school, it's like 250, and then you fast forward to a larger facility, now you're in the millions of dollars. And so we, on my side of the table and with M&O, we have to take the information that's going to be provided to us and do a comparison to say, okay, here's our worst case scenario and prioritize them and then monetize those to say, we have X amount of dollars and we have X amount of need, and how can we address them based on what we have in hand and what the need is. And so it becomes challenging, to say the least, but it's something that we have to consider and something that we will continue to discuss as we get more information back from, our teams to inform us as to what our true needs are.
And so just doing, again, very, on back of the envelope math, if we're talking about 250,000 per elementary school, we have around 30 of those. We're talking about 7.5 million to outfit all elementary schools. I think I heard 2.5 million to outfit a high school. Let's say that that's the same cost for, would it be six high schools, right? If we're talking
So
about
we take
Robert.
200, so if we do 250,000 times 35 elementary schools on average, that's $8.75 million. Then if we do our high schools, and I'm just going to say $3 million, right? Times, we have 5. Well, yeah, we have 5. Well, we don't have to count American because they already have a new chiller, so we'll do 4. So that's $12 million just for our high schools.
And what about middle schools? That would be
And
another
the
12.
the middle schools, we're not going to have to do any modifications because those are all new systems. And those will
can
meet
take
the
MERV 13?
2020. Pardon me?
Those can take MERV 13?
Those systems can take MERV 13. Those were designed based on the 2020 IBC. So they are, we do not anticipate having any challenges with our new middle schools. And those that are currently in construction, we have actually already modified the designs to meet the new standards if they were already not meeting them. So, all of the Thornton, the Hopkins, the Horners, the only one that we probably have to go back and look at would be Walters, because Walters was finished a few years ago, pre-pandemic. So we need to do an evaluation to make sure that they are going to be able to meet whatever requirements, have been set forth. But we don't anticipate having any problems with the middle schools.
Got it. So just to complete that math, right? And I think you may have said it, but I missed it. So we're taking 12 million for the high schools. We're taking 8 million or so for the elementary schools. We're looking around $20 million in order to be able to have MERV 13 at all of our school sites. And again, that's obviously.
Well, you also have to. we
Yeah, go
also
ahead.
have to look at our offices in the district office, because that also has to be compliant as well for the, the people who are working, every day in the offices. So, and that ballpark is around $8 million for those two facilities, for M&O and for the district office, to be retrofitted and outfitted with the state-of-the-art, latest and the greatest, to ensure safety of everybody. So it's, $30 million to
Right. Yeah. So
look at
28
something like
million
this, so.
or $30 million. So that's the range that we
Yeah.
would be talking about in
Yeah.
order to address those needs. And outside of that, we, Liz, could I remind you to comment here?
Yes, I was looking at the last item here, California Building Code. Actually, Kelly mentioned the DGS website, which is, this link goes to that web page. They actually consolidate the code from 3 different sources of statute, and they call it the California Building Standards Code. So insert the word standards. But we're primarily looking at Title 24, Section 102.1. So I think there's a typo here. There aren't 2 sections really, there's just the one, and it addresses indoor air quality and ventilation. So if we could just correct that last bit. There's also a way to link directly to Section 102.1, which I think is better than just linking to the page generally, because there are a lot of subsections, and you need to know which subsection to go to find the proper section. So I gave a link to Antonio earlier, and he could, if he doesn't mind.
Yeah,
switching that
absolutely.
out.
So I'm gonna make the first edit I can make right now. I'll take it as an amendment. It would be the 2021 IBC. So I'm making that change. So to the extent anyone's on the link, you can see it. And then you're suggesting that it read California Building Code Title 24, Section 102.1.
It's California Building Standards Code. So insert the word standards.
Yep.
And let me look at it here just a moment.
Sure.
Where, it's on the end, isn't it? There we go. Title 24, Section 102.1, interior environments and ventilation. So remove that second repeat. Yeah.
Yep.
And
Are you able to drop the link in the chat so that I can just fix that, and then we could go ahead and potentially complete
I found
the report?
That link to be very helpful, because after reading it, I came to understand that MERV 13 is the standard that California goes by, which isn't actually mentioned in the International Building Code. And I guess it's important to remember too that standards that are put out by the state are what's considered the minimum standards. So Kelly kind of alluded to the fact that when we build these systems, you sort of have to future-proof them a little bit. So if you can exceed a standard, that builds in a certain amount of longevity into the system. So let me just put in that link, and there you go. Sorry, it's real long, but it's very descriptive.
Thank you so much. I'll make that change now. Appreciate you doing the research on that. Do we have general questions or any other discussion about the report?
I do have just a question about, on the recommendations, the slide that requests that there be a policy or update, I think. I'm having to.
Are we talking about the recommendations slide?
The recommendations slide, and it says establish new updated district standard. I was wondering if you meant by that like some kind of board policy, because we do have board policies on new construction. Maybe this is like a board policy on modernization, perhaps.
I'll hand it off to Kelly. She can give the context about the recurring nature of this, kind of generally where we stand and what this would entail.
Okay.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay.
I want to make sure that I'm clear.
Well, it says establish new updated district standards that meet the 2021 IBC code. I mean, I would take it to mean really that anything that we build, we want to try to meet our local jurisdiction, or not even local, but our state jurisdiction requirements. So insofar as maybe the state requirements surpass IBC, then, you know, we have a certain
Liz, if I may, I can ask the direct question that'll hopefully get us the answer. Kelly, what standards do we have currently in place? What IBC code requirements are they currently meeting? And what is the cadence of updating these district standards? What do they look like if they're not, you know, board policy? Is this done by the superintendent's office? Is this done by the director of facilities? What are these standards that are being referred to in this recommendation? That's the context we're looking for.
So the standards that I'm referring to are the ones that have been identified in our district board policy, as well as our district standards, which is a document that is published, I believe, every 5 years. And in looking at our standards, I believe the last update to the specifics of our HVAC and our building standards was from 2009. So we're grossly behind in terms of our documentation of those updates. But in terms of the new construction that's occurring, we have, in essence, I won't say by default, but because the new buildings have been built within the last 5 years, those standards by which they're being built supersede the ones that we have on our books that are district standards. And so we're in the process in working with the superintendent's office to actually do a full update of all of our district standards so that we meet 2021 and beyond requirements for everything under the sun that's in our you know, our policies and procedures, as well as our standards, so that, you know, everything is brought current on a document level, as well as those documents then can be used for implementation downstream. So I hope that answers the question.
It does, and so we do have some board policy that could be created if it's not existent, and I'm wondering if, and I tried to look this up myself on the Association of Student Board, or California Association of Student Board Members. I forget the state association for trustees, but they sometimes have model policies that you can borrow from. And perhaps there are some that have to do with modernization of facilities. Obviously, when things have to do with fire, life, and safety, they take a high priority. And perhaps the board policy might reflect these kinds of priorities. I wish I could offer an example, but I couldn't find them very easily. But I'm hoping that maybe our trustees will have better access to those kinds of resources.
And in line with that, Kelly, since I'm going to go to 2 more people in the queue, you said that these district standards, the ones from 2009, are publicly available. Is that something that's readily accessible that you could potentially drop in the chat so that we could kind of get a feel for what the standards look like?
Let me see if I can find them.
Okay.
I believe they are on our district website. I just don't recall what the link is, but I can research that and provide that to you all if I'm not able to do it this evening.
Sure, absolutely. I believe Brian was in line.
unmute here. Thank you, Antonio. I wanted to thank the subcommittee. I think they did a good job incorporating all the feedback that was discussed last time. And in fact, I'm trying to think if there was anything that wasn't addressed. But based on what I'm seeing here, I'd like to move that we accept the report.
Do I have a second? And then I'll move to the person next in queue. Do I have a second? Great. Continuing the discussion, Henry?
Oh, I was just going to answer Liz's question earlier, but the thing is, do we need to talk about the motion first, or? I mean, I was just going to basically mention to Liz that I think that recommendation came up because, like, we were talking about in the subcommittee at Horner, at American, and Irvington, the new buildings. When the HVAC was installed, they were installed without windows that could be open. I mean, before COVID, it wasn't that big of an issue under the building code at that time. But now the district realized that, well, now we do need the windows open also, just when we do need more ventilation. So I think that's where that one combination came up. And Kelly already mentioned the fact that starting now, all the new buildings will have windows along with the. Is that correct, Kelly? I mean, all the new buildings now.
That is correct. We did make some design modifications, and they will have the high clear story windows in the, where classrooms have really high ceilings. The windows will be up at the top so that, the ventilation, the airflow comes in from the top and then drops down and circulates through the room. So we are looking at that and looking at how we can modify some of the existing buildings that have windows that have been sealed shut or painted shut or things like that. So we'll definitely be addressing that for sure.
And just a quick reminder, Liz, are you in queue for discussion? Okay, just as a quick reminder, to the extent that you're either building new or you're essentially renovating or retrofitting up to a certain extent, then you may be required to conform with updated standards. But otherwise, standards for existing buildings, that's what these district standards would apply to, right? Just all other
Correct.
Buildings. Okay, right. So unless you're, renovating it or building anew, you're going to be meeting these 2009 standards, and that recommendation is tailored towards updating them to be compliant with 2021 IBC code requirements, and so would begin that process. Is there any Thank you so much. Is there any debate on this item? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and proceed to voting on the recommendation. Or sorry, on accepting the report along with its recommendations. And should I understand the motion to also, upon accepting the report, being sent to the board?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further debate. Oh, I do have one point of clarification, and I would ask the maker of the motion, would you encourage the subcommittee to work with the principals to the extent that they would benefit? I understand Judy is going to be using this report, especially if it's accepted, to give further context, but in terms of either providing additional direction, a one-pager, if you will, or something along those lines. It doesn't actually have to be in this motion. We could, but I would actually, let's just vote on the motion as is. Sorry about that, Brian. All right, so the motion as is to accept the report with the modifications that Liz provided and are currently in the report, and to then share with the board. So all in favor, please raise your virtual hands or physical hands if you have a camera on. Thank you. Double voting is discouraged. All right, please lower your hands. All opposed? All right, thank you. It's unanimously approved. I would now entertain a motion to direct the subcommittee to work with the principals if needed on providing any direction as desired. I do have some subcommittee members, so if you would rather not, please please let me know. But that, I think that would be helpful in creating standards and guidance for site administrators, given the work
I will
that we've
make a
done.
motion. I will make a motion to create a simple document to share with administrators.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any debate or discussion?
I think that, you know, sharing this entire presentation is certainly helpful and would authorize the subcommittee to do so.
I think the only idea would be, and I believe they're already off, like we would be able to, since it'd be it has been adopted and it's a public document. It would be being able to synthesize direction to a one pager so that if you don't go through the whole document, you at least have direction on what you should be doing at your site level.
I agree, Antonio, but Liz, just so you know, I haven't shared it yet because it was not adopted by this committee. But when it is, you know, now that it is, I will share the presentation, but I agree with Antonio. The simpler, the better, because there's so much going over our desk, as you can imagine.
Right. Yeah, you know, it's just, you hate to see any information be omitted, you know, that could potentially clarify things for someone. But, and of course, we haven't seen a simplified document to know what it looks like either. But, yeah.
You could also, for example, you could have it be cleared by the district liaison, in this case, Kelly, before submission to any principals,
Right.
so that would ensure there's no concerns about content.
Right, right. No, that sounds great. Mm-hmm.
I can't quite make motions.
So can I amend my motion to include that we will share it with Kelly and have her approve it before it goes out with the presentation to administrators?
Great. Do I have a second for the amendment?
I'll second.
Great. Any debate or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, which is to create a one pager that needs to be pre-cleared with Kelly so that it can be sent out along with the presentation. Please raise your virtual hands if you're in favor. Thank you. Please lower your hands. All opposed? All right, so the ayes have it and the motion is unanimously adopted. Now let's quickly move to, I think, thoughts on future meeting topics. So we would probably be meeting, if I look back at, just one second, let me look back at prior meetings, and then I'll take the cue. So seems like we would meet in August, I think. That may be correct. So that would probably be the next meeting, unless you, unless the committee decides to meet over the summer. Liz. Sorry, you're on mute.
My apologies. I don't believe we've spoken about it in the past, except in passing, but it would be good, I think, to look at transitional kindergarten, since that is something that is the state is going to be spending some money on, and it has already put into place a transition plan to make transitional kindergarten universal, and what that might mean for our facilities and planning for that.
Thank you. And so I typically take so if Henry, if you could lower your hand for now, and I'll call you next. Anybody interested in discussing transitional kindergarten at a future meeting? Likely the next one. Please raise your hand. And this would have to do with the facilities aspect of planning for a move towards transitional kindergarten. All right.
Just me.
Can I,
Yes, go ahead, Brian.
I just
Is that a
make
I would
clarifying
love to
question?
talk about it.
well, perhaps a clarifying comment. I believe transitional oh no, wait, maybe it's full day kindergarten as part of the long range facilities plan. What was in the scope of the long range facilities plan update? Maybe it was full day kindergarten versus transitional kindergarten. Anyway, I just we wanted to recommend we time it with whatever other planning is happening.
I think it is important that you all do look at that because there is a sizable amount of state funding available for us to take advantage of if we do offer a transitional kindergarten program for our full day kindergarten program. And there is a very small window available for us as a district to apply for that and potentially get, full funding for it based on what plan we propose, as well as how we can implement it in a very short period of time. So I think it's very relevant. I, of course, have personal and selfish issues wanting you guys to talk about it, but it's definitely one that we should consider and one that we can utilize, other people's money to actually implement and implement it pretty quickly.
So it seems like at the very least it would be a staff update, and if not a introduction item, depending on timing, to discuss this matter. Henry, and then Trustee Jones.
So just before August, I was wondering if for the long range master plan, just to clarify, Kelly, do the staff, do we need to have all the surveys done by then, like at all the sites, or can we wait until August and then wonder if we can just have a discussion at that time just to see what the next step should be?
So the associate superintendent and superintendent has requested that, we delay getting that information from you all so that you all can focus and prepare on, preparing for school in the fall. But from my very selfish perspective, and one that, I have my marching orders and things that I'm responsible for, the sooner we can get that information from your teams at your schools, the better it will be, because it will allow us to, one, those sites that complete the surveys early, begin the work of the update that's required. And then it will give us very specific data points to establish our benchmarks for how we want to identify and prioritize work for the update in the long range facilities master plan. So yes, you do have additional time if you require it to work on it in the fall. But if you have the desire and the capacity and the folks at your site have the ability to finish it, we in facilities as well as the design team would really appreciate getting that information sooner than later. But you all do have the option to defer and provide us that information in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
So moving forward, I would like to discourage conversation or discussion on items. But this would be that would be a great topic or question to raise during staff update. And Trustee Jones?
Yeah, I just wanted to second the importance of discussions about TK and full day kindergarten. Because even if, as we move to middle schools and we have declining enrollment, we may have rooms at elementary schools, but TK and K classrooms have specific requirements that mean that there will need to be upgrades and renovations to rooms in order to make them suitable for TK and K, specifically as they, access to restrooms. And I don't know if there are standards, Kelly, you might know about how close they need to be to the appropriate outdoor play structure area. There's a whole lot that goes into that. And the sooner we start looking at that in terms of our demographic projections for TK in kindergarten, what that means at each site in terms of facilities and not just do we have the classrooms, but how many classrooms might need to be renovated in order to do that. And the sooner the better, because if Kelly is saying we may have funds available to us if we apply for them soon, I don't know what the deadlines are, but I don't want to miss that, because it's not like we have excess bond funds or anything sitting around. We just don't have extra funds to do it without applying for grants. So we need to move forward.
Got it. So despite regardless of the threshold, I think at the chair's discretion, like that will be an agenda item at the next meeting, given the comments I've heard. And then if I don't hear an objection, I'd like to extend for 1 minute to hear Brian's comment. All right, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to ask if we could get email updates regarding any updates to the long range facilities plan. Kind of throughout the summer, just to keep the committee abreast. Because
I have no problem in doing that for you guys.
Yeah. If like the surveys are happening sooner than we expect, or if things are happening sooner than we expect, it may affect what we want to agendize for our meeting. So
I'd be happy to provide those.
I may want to change this agenda item in the future to potentially also include like some cursory Q&A, so that fits within the scope moving forward, given this meeting. Okay, great. So assuming we meet in August, see you all in August. If I don't hear from you sooner, have a great summer. And thank you so much for volunteering to be on this committee. All right, have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
All right.
Have a good summer.